Hey guys, I have a very practical topic we're going to tackle today, and that is it's actually something I get asked all the time. May even seem kind of weird out of left field, but I think it illustrates a deeper issue of understanding how to make good business decisions in music and just in business in general. And that topic is, Brock, how do I know when to switch from sort of free to paid? Meaning, like if you use Canva for design work, or if you're using like something like GarageBand that's free and switching to like ProTools or Logic, upgrading basically from like a free LinkedIn account to a pro account where you're paying. The idea being that you've been using something that's free and you're feeling this tension like I need to switch into like a paid environment. And the question being, how do I know when the right time is for, for that transition? And to me, it may seem easy, it may seem very logical, it may seem even just intuitive and a stupid question, but the truth is so many people struggle with this one because it's tied into finances, it's tied into budgeting, it's tied into even just sort of right and wrong decisions. So let me help you with, I think, three keys of making that decision. And sometimes it's one, sometimes it's actually two or all of these. And there could obviously be other factors, but I think these three will help you always make that decision the right way at the right time. And the first is simply when you feel that you've reached the limits of the capability or the capacity of that tool you're using. So if you're using GarageBand and you're editing, you're producing tracks, whatever you're doing, and you just feel like you keep running into the edges or the limits of whatever that service is. Canva, if you feel like you just need to unlock additional templates. LinkedIn, if you just feel like, hey, I'm promoting myself and my art in that professional community, and I just feel like I'm not really tapping into the data or the metrics. So in some way or another, you've kind of reached the capacity, you've reached the limit of what that free service or that lower cost service can provide. Very easy reason that you transition into the paid environment. But before you do, when the reason is based on I've kind of hit the limits, you need to make sure that before you make that jump, that the next layer, the next tier, the pay, going from free to paid or whatever that transition is that next tier is going to actually meet the need that you're reaching the limit on. So if it's something like Canva, and I use Canva just because I know a lot of artists, make thumbnails and different. I use Canva a lot. It's a really practical tool. If it's just, for example, I need more templates, but you get into the pro version, you realize, man, there's more templates, but they're none that I would use. You're still in the same issue, but now you're spending more money. Same with like GarageBand. If you're reaching capacity, but you're not actually going to learn how to use Logic or Pro Tools or whatever effectively, then you're spending more money for an environment that you're actually not going to flourish in. You're going to sort of squander that money. And I'm a big advocate of really taking stock of the finances that you have, the resources you have, and not squandering them. And I use this as an example. Right when I got out of law school, or passed the bar actually, I had a lot of friends that, we all knew kind of we wanted to start our own practice. And some, went to work for other people, figuring it was a way to get to their own. They would kind of branch off at some point. Some people just started right away, and they started really small, and they started in some sort of closet in the cheapest building they could find or whatever. But others went for the high rise. They went for the maximum expense, the maximum look and feel, and they felt like, if I look like I'm a high dollar attorney, I'm in a big building, I'm high rise, all that kind of stuff, I'll attract clients of higher value or work of higher value. And to me, I learned something long before I graduated from law school, and that was, it's not what you make, it's what you keep. And I've always been an advocate of being very mindful of your expenses, being very mindful of your budget. And so I say that because when you make the decision to sort of go from free to paid or tier one to tier two, even including on constant contact, whatever the tool that you're struggling with this issue is, always make sure, first of all, if you've reached capacity, if you've reached the limit, that when you look at the next tier and you're willing to pay for it, you're willing to invest because you think, okay, I've reached the maximum capacity of this one, it's time to go into the next one. Make sure that you're going to actually invest in learning the next one, and that the next tier has what you need. Because if it's simply more templates, or if it's more loops, like it's, going from GarageBand to Logic, and you're like, I just need 10,000 more loops. There may be a way to get more loops into GarageBand that doesn't require the expense of Logic. And it's just to get you thinking about those sorts of things. So that's sort of reason number one. Reason number two, it's sort of the industry standard, or maybe the industry language. And so what you're using no longer effectively communicates with the rest of the industry, and or it just kind of looks like you're not up to speed. So I'll use this example. For many years, as a student in college, I went to graduate school after college, before law school, went to law school. I used PCs. I had, I think, a Dell laptop. I had, just different PCs. I was in a meeting one time, and it was the first time I ever noticed this, that it was like 7 or 8 people in there. We all had our laptops. It was all, we get in the room and we're all like, all right, let's flip up, let's get going. And we all open our laptops, and within seconds, everybody else in the room was up and running. Meanwhile, I'm waiting for mine. It's like, all that stuff. And granted, this was quite a few years back. But my point is, and I noticed everyone had Macs except me. I had a PC. And I'd been struggling with this, feeling like my PC wasn't keeping up, feeling like, hey, it's cheaper, but I'd noticed more and more people on Macs. And so I had this kind of tension of, am I speaking the language of my clients? When I show up with a certain type of equipment and everybody else has a different type of equipment. And granted, there's a lot we could talk about even on that subject matter. And I know some people feel very emotional about, Apple's proprietary system and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get into that. Just simply talking about, for me, in my practice, I instantly realized I'm at a disadvantage because it took 2 minutes for my laptop to boot up. Meanwhile, everyone else in the room is up and running, ready to go, waiting on me and staring at me like, what's going on, dude? And so it was enough for me to say, maybe it's time to invest in an Apple system, right? But for any of you who have done that, or are a part of the Apple community, that's not necessarily a cheap transition, right? You could go from a $200, $400 laptop to a $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 laptop. But I needed to change my entire infrastructure of my law practice. So it wasn't a couple grand, it was a big expense. But I took survey of where I was. I took survey of what I needed to do to speak the language of my industry, and realized I need to make this transition. So I need to go sort of the analogy being sort of from free to paid, or from low cost to a higher cost, because I was always being placed at a disadvantage in speed and language and a lot of other reasons, because I wasn't speaking the language of my client. In this case, it was sort of the branding and environment of products that we were all using. So for me, that made a lot of sense to transition. For you, if you're using GarageBand and everyone around you is using Logic, that could be reason enough for you to speak the same language. The transferability of files. Now, I know you're going to tell me, hey, Brock, anyone that uses Logic could access a GarageBand, transcode it, or change the file format, or just even incorporate what you've done into Logic file, or a ProTools file. I get that. My point has less to do about sort of the portability and more to do with the language, and realizing that if the standard is this and you're not operating within that standard, that may be reason enough for you to transition. And if you find that it's keeping you at a disadvantage, if it's making people take you less serious, even if you're amazing at what you do. So if it is GarageBand, for example, if that's what's keeping you at a disadvantage because everybody else is on a more expensive platform, it's not a waste of money to consider the perspective that people have towards you and your work simply because you're not on the same platform. So that's another reason to consider. The final reason that I would throw in here is sort of that, in order to grow your art or your fan base, or like let's say you are building an audience and you've been using a free version of some sort of contact customer service management software, some free solution. and you realize, I really can't access my fans. I can't send out emails the way I want to, or communications. And so it becomes more about growing as an artist. It becomes more about growing and developing and evolving as an artist. When that is the driving decision, then you can look at it as, I'm sort of growing from grade level 1 to grade level 2, or tier 1 to tier 2. And so it's not so much that you don't speak the language, it's the pace at which you need to grow. But at the end of the day, as you consider these 3 things, and I'm going to round it up right now, as you consider these, the reason why this is so important is because a lot of times people will, they'll think of this as like, that's such a stupid thing to even be worried about. Like, what are you stressed about? Just drop some money, get the right thing. But the right thing is just because it costs more money, not because you've actually thought through whether this solution makes sense. Because if like I do, most independent artists are either struggling, or they don't just have money to burn. They can't just throw money at this and that, because the expenses kill them. And remember, it's not what you make, it's what you keep. So if your expenses are always high, and that's keeping you from making a good income, putting food on the table, being able to travel, or whatever it is you want to do, then you do have to consider making smart business decisions is being a good artist. So rounding it out, look at when these decisions come up. Do I need to switch from this platform to that, from this tier to that, from this free version to this paid version? Look at all 3 of those questions. But ask yourself, is it worth the investment to invest in myself? And if investing in myself means I'm just going to have a tool that I maybe won't really fully exploit the potential of that platform, then it may be a waste of money, even if you now have the industry standard. I don't care, like, I can afford Pro Tools. I don't have Pro Tools because I know I don't have the time to invest in learning Pro Tools. So it really doesn't matter if I have the industry standard. I won't be operating at industry standard. You know what I mean? And I'm not a producer and all that. But for you, you have to consider what makes sense. Having the ability to afford something, a transition, doesn't mean you should make the expense. So consider all those things, make a good decision, and when you make that decision, go all in, learn the new platform or the new tier, learn all of the new tools there. Make sure that you're extracting the maximum amount of value from that decision. Because if you're like most people, if you're going to struggle with that decision, then it's an important one. Even if you think it's not, even if people are like, you're stupid for even worrying about that, just spend the extra money. Or they try to embarrass you. Well, you don't have an extra $20 a month for that platform. Many independent artists don't have an extra $20 a month laying around. So be wise, because at the end of the day, you will be the one making better business decisions, having more money in your pocket because you're thinking through this stuff. So that's what I want to leave you with. Jump into the next video, which I think will be really helpful. Check the link in below.